Plex Track is the premier pen test reporting and collaboration platform, empowering your team to spend more time hacking and less time reporting. Plex Track centralizes your data, streamlines tedious workflows, automates report building, and facilitates communication with stakeholders. To learn how you can achieve a 30% increase in efficiency and cut report cycles by up to 65%, head to securityweekly.com/Plex Track. Claim your free month of Plex Track and get your copy of the Writing a Killer Penetration Test Report Guide today.
Hey there, welcome back for the news. But first, we'd like to invite our listeners to be part of our 2023 SC Awards. Our prestigious and competitive SC Awards program recognizes outstanding innovations, organizations, and leaders that are advancing the practice of information security. This year, there are awards in 36 categories up for grabs, including Best IT Security-Related Training Program, Innovator of the Year, Best SASE Solution, and more. We'd love to see your company in the spotlight. Visit securityweekly.com/SC Awards to submit your entries by March 13th. It's coming up quick. All right, so to the news. Let's see here. Yeah, I'm not going to be like Paul, and I'm not going to go right for my stories. But yes, I am, actually. My story number 5. I know.
Well, technically, you're not going to Paul's story. So
this is true. I'm not going right to Paul's stories because Paul's not here, man. Dave can't. Sorry, Dave, I can't do that. But I know we talked a little bit before about some stories that we want to make sure we hit because I know Mandy's going to leave us a little early tonight. Okay. But my story number 5. So I am going to pull a little bit of Paul here. Dumb password rules. You guys see this?
Did see it. I don't even think I saw it through this channel. I think somebody at my company posted it on our Slack channel.
Yep. Yeah, I think I posted it there. This is... I thought this was the same folks that Have I Been Pwned Yet? But
that's what I thought too. But
yeah.
I just was kind of fact checking before I said that because this comes from
Duffin.
Guffin
or yeah, Duffin. Yeah, so not who we thought it was, and originally not who I had originally thought it was attributed to. But yeah. So it's a cataloging of sites that use dumb password rules, and I don't even know how many there are here. But you scroll through here, and they're alphabetically listed, and there is a huge list of sites here. And quote, what makes a dumb password? You probably know it when you see it. Maximum 17 characters, must start with a 7, no tildes allowed, and so forth. This isn't a scientific study. There aren't any hard and fast rules, so let's talk about it. But some of these sites here are like, yeah, looking at the sites, I'll just pick one at random here. Equifax, the work number. 8 to 16 characters, numeric digits only, and not the same as the user ID. Other issues: allows and encourages the use of sequences like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, social security number, date of birth, and today's date. Let's pick another one at random here. National Bank of Canada. Password length must be 8 to 25 characters. Must contain at least one lower letter in any position, one digit in any position. Cannot contain spaces. And copy paste is not allowed when trying to set a new password. Yep, dumb password rules. Let's see. I'll pick another one here.
Go to BBVA.
Was it BBVA?
BBVA, the bank.
Let's see. BBVA. Yeah, your username is your national ID, easy to find. And your password must have up to 6 alphanumeric characters only. For a bank account with all of your money in one of the largest financial institutions in the world.
Yes, it says your password must have between 4 and 6 characters. Please use numbers and letters. I mean, this and the other bank ones that are on here absolutely make my skin crawl. Like this one, because I guess my basic mindset is that nothing should have less than 12 characters and at minimum 16. And people should be using password managers to generate separate ones for the most baseline.
And that's where
LastPass?
and that's where that copy paste thing comes in.
Yep.
Right. That's just cruel. But to then just limit it to 6 characters, like what is the security team doing? Like,
they're not involved, or they don't have one.
Wow. So I just happened to ADP. I'm like, payroll processing? Like, forced to change the password during first login. And at least they could use proper grammar in their rule list. And it's a screenshot, and it says between 8 and 20 characters, minimum of 1 uppercase and 1 lowercase, minimum of 1 digit or special character, and tells you what the special characters that are acceptable are. At most, 3 repeating characters, maximum of 3 subsequent characters, different from last 4 passwords used, and no given name, surname, or login. Given is spelled Givin, name is spelled Neam. I feel like this is a troll. I really do.
That could be.
This is a security awareness training page.
Well, I don't know how many weeks ago.
But the real hacker wouldn't make those dumb mistakes. But
yeah,
we were talking about passwords sometime in the last month or so.
Yep.
And and I think we were talking about multi-factor authentication and the use of LastPass or password vaults. And when I see things, they kind of stick with me. It's a gift and a curse. But using a password vault is not something and like PCI requires the use for multi-factor authentication of 2 different form factors, and people are using password vaults where they log in once every 30 or 60 days, and they're bringing up their password for that whatever they're logging into. That's not something that they know as well, and then they use like some sort of SMS or whatever PIN that gets generated for them. That's not multi-factor authentication by definition, and that's been sticking in my craw for a while. And it made me go back and actually look at the NIST guidance that came out in the last year or two that kind of steered away from password complexity and password expiration, which have been part of the PCI standards since the very beginning. And they kind of, and I'm paraphrasing grossly, but NIST basically said the longer the better. That's the most important thing you can do is pick long passwords. And what I'm interested, I'm trying to put together a talk in this because I think it's interesting where the different things you do to try to protect authentication, which is what we're talking about at the end of the day, and like password complexity, which is what all these password rules are. What does that actually protect against, and does it work? Password length, what does that actually protect against, and does that work? Password expiration, what does that actually protect against, and does that work? And where do these things overlap, and where do they not, and are any of them necessary or not? I think it's interesting. I haven't done all the research yet, but stay tuned. If somebody's done it already, please let me know, and it'll save me the trouble.
I think that's a very interesting thing you brought up, that if your password manager lowers your thing down to something you have.
Yep.
But if you had to put in the master password every day, then I think it would be 2-factor authentication all by itself, being both something and something you have.
It could be, but I've brought this up with a client or two recently and asked, because I'm doing virtual over-the-shoulder interviews, and they're usually doing it off screen where like, okay, I have to do my multi-factor authentication, but I've been asking them like, what exactly are you doing? What are you using? And I don't want to give any names, but I was they're using something. I said, well, did you log on to it today? Just as you were using it? Oh no, we log on to it and it's good for 30 days, 60 days. Maybe that's something that's valid, Sam, that maybe it could be still valid for multi-factor authentication, but you have to log into it every day or log into it every time you use it. And what I find most fascinating is all that exists. I think password vaults exist. We think it's because, well, it'll automatically generate a strong password that obviates all these silly rules that we're reading and laughing about. But it's really done for convenience at the end of the day. Those things are sold for convenience. And what's that got to do with security, for crying out loud?
Everything. If things are inconvenient, people won't do it.
Yep.
Yeah, there are some password managers that are better than others too. You look at something like 1Password, where you do have something like you have to have the secret key in order to even type in the master password to get to the vault. And so you're ending up with a seed and a secret that is something you have to know just to do the master password to then get to something. And if you're doing that right, honestly, I still have a hardware token for most of my vaults as the authenticator. So you should have multi-factor on there. And if you want to go even further, like FIDO2 with a PIN and a multi-factor that's saved in a vault, that's kind of the best case scenario. So I think there's a lot of different ways around that, but it is a convenience thing. I don't want to type a 32-character password, and I don't even like the fact that my browser has access to certain passwords, which is why I've switched to other things. So there's pros and cons of the convenience versus usability versus ongoing thing that the regular users are going to support.
Well, Tyler, I mentioned it on the first segment. I'm trying to look at what the article number is. My article 7 and then 8 is the actual Spec Ops weak password report, where the password is still the most common term used by hackers to successfully breach enterprise networks. That's the story, and then the actual report's there. I haven't had a chance to read the report, but it's there, and it wasn't even behind a paywall. I didn't have to give any PII data, and that link is to the actual PDF if anybody's interested. Part of the reason I'm wondering about this in addition is obviously from a PCI perspective, there's certain rules that technically aren't being met. Like for years, my clients used the Microsoft built-in password complexity setting. It was just a box to check. But if you read the details of what that enabled, it wasn't technically compliant with the PCI requirement, and yet we accepted it all the time. Because I think back in version 2 of PCI, they wanted an uppercase and a lowercase and a special character and a digit, and the way the Microsoft complexity was, it was one of those. It wasn't like all 4 of them. It was like 2 out of the 4 or 3 out of 4, something like that. But it makes me wonder, and I'm an old timer, to think that the security paradigms don't change and the principles don't change. But in the case of multi-factor authentication, I'm wondering if we need to rewrite the definition and just. I don't think it's wrong that people are using password vaults. It just doesn't technically meet the requirement. Maybe it's time to rewrite the requirement.
Man, any other thoughts here? I was reading through some more of these sites and horrified about some of these.
Well, since I think of the general users, not our more educated, aware listeners here, that literally, even with a password manager with ineffective multi-factor authentication, by mere virtue of getting people to use unique, longer passwords, I'm happy. And then on the other side of it, I feel like with this website, it should be looked at, it should be noticed, and that people who are coding all of this really need to pay attention, and those are the ones that need to be educated as well. This is, and I think all of our listeners should pay attention to contributing to this repo. So you can go to, what is the dumbpasswordrules.com.
Yep.
And go to the contribute, button and add some.
Well, where I want to go in the talk that I have yet to put together, but it's in my head, is I want to advocate for, all right, why don't we just actually try to educate people to use really, really long passwords or passphrases that they can remember, so it meets the multi-factor authentication form requirement, and it's, robust. It's got the complexity, but more so, it's got the length. And even if it's word-based, do the little tricks that make it hard for the password cracking tools, if that's what you're protecting against, which is why I wanted to kind of do that matrix of what are you actually protecting against. And I want to advocate for just, for the love of God, how hard is it to remember a phrase? Yes, it's a convenience factor, I guess, to type it in, and maybe the cut and paste thing would be helpful, but then, are they keeping it in Notepad or some flat file? But, I'm not sure I want to die on this sword yet, but as an old timer, I want to advocate for just come up with a long, really good password that you can remember and use that, because that's what I've been doing for years. I don't use a password vault. I use passphrases that are based on obscure song lyrics, and I do the mixing up to defeat what I know are the normal password cracking rules to make it impervious to brute force attack. And I run with that. Now, and there's other issues that come up, like if it gets compromised in one place, if I reused it somewhere else. Yes, but that's a different part of the matrix, if that makes sense.
Yep. So I think a lot of that is like the number of sites. Like any given day, I would say at a very minimum, on a slow day, I probably log into at least once 30 plus websites on any given day, if not 60. And then you combine that across multiple, different work accounts, different personas. I think there's probably 600 different accounts in just one of my vaults. So
I dare say you're not the norm, though, Tyler. Just a guess.
Even put that to 1%. That's still a substantial amount to continue. Like you look at email, work and personal. You look at
do they all need the same level of protection? Do you have throwaway accounts that you could use a weaker password that you perhaps reuse?
Good.
Tyler doesn't have any throwaway accounts, because if they're not throwaway, they become personas.
Or he uses them for Bitcoin.
Right.
Yeah, I don't like to lose my personas either. Something that was temporary becomes very important later on.
But I'll tell you what, I don't know how long my current password is. It's like somewhere between 20 and 25 characters that I have to use to log into my corporate laptop every morning. And you do it a couple times if you know how to use type. I've got the muscle memory down. I can type it in. Even though it's 25 characters, I'm typing it in, in a second or two. It's not that big a deal.
Yep. I have one, Jeff, that it was funny. I wanted to a couple different passwords that I use in some variations depending on where they were, and I was logging into something that I log into very regularly now, and I wanted it to be this one password variation, and it wouldn't let me do it because I had two letters that were duplicated in a row. Like if it had the word food in it, like you couldn't have two O's together.
Right.
So I couldn't use that password. So I picked another password, but that password wasn't long enough.
Right.
So I did that password twice. Like I have the muscle memory of that password, but I don't have the muscle memory yet of that I have to remember to type it twice.
Right.
So I type it and I hit enter and I'm like, damn it, I got to do it twice. Now I'm typing the password 3 times.
See, I think the other argument here is, and having gone through this with several of my personas or on some of the op boxes when doing some nation state stuff, was if you need to change a large swath of passwords or see what passwords you may have had access to or have used on a particular box because something was compromised, you don't know if there was a keylogger on there. So I needed to know very quickly and change a whole bunch of personas' passwords or infrastructure pieces for that particular box because it had the potential of being compromised. Or if you get compromised, the ability to quickly recover and go through and change huge amounts of passwords. That's where password managers, I think,
again, Tyler, I think you're not the normal citizen.
I mean, we know he's not normal, but he's not a normal computer user either.
You're not the typical use case.
Well, having helped a couple people recover accounts, right? If, say, 4 social media accounts and your Gmail and your single sign-on, which is usually your Gmail, if those are all tied to something, maybe a Ring those are all tied and federated. And one of those gets compromised, like your email or even your Facebook, and there's a shared account across that. The ability to recover that, reset the one, and then not have the attacker reset that in short order and get back to a usable state is a very hard. In fact, I think even the password managers fail at doing this well. There's not a great service for recovering from a breached or stolen identity. I think this is a missing service and or product that we've been trying to figure out how to do for free for people. But it's not that easy for, say, your grandma, your wife to go through and know all the places that she needs to, revoke access, expire sessions, change passwords, and reset multi-factor and phone numbers. Like once an attacker gets in, they start setting up multi-factor on things that you didn't have it on, or changing those phone numbers. Like you have to react very quickly. You're talking about less than 5 minutes sometimes to do all of these at the same time. So I think, again, a missing service and an argument for maybe keeping those in a place, but even the password vaults still fail at this, and there's not a great service for that. So there's your $1 million idea to go do.
There you go.
And still, password is the most common term used by hackers to breach enterprise networks.
Yep.
So stupid.
Yeah, looking at that report, the two most common passwords for the NVIDIA hack were NVIDIA and NVIDIA 3D.
I mean, for years of testing PCI was to, there's a requirement to change all the vendor default passwords. And we had to go through the exercise, and we had these long lists of all the vendor default passwords. What was the original Cisco default password? Anybody remember?
So 6 zeros, 4 zeros?
Older than that.
No? Okay.
Let's see. Calvin was the Dell IPMI.
Yep. Root and Calvin. Yep.
Cisco.
There's many examples. I think it was Frisco. I actually honestly don't remember. It's been so long, but it was like Frisco or something like that.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I remember doing that on the console several times, but
But default passwords aren't the problem. Password is the problem.
Yep. Now, Jeff, here's an interesting one for you.
Change me was the big one that's always there. Like it's just people have policies. They set up an account. They're expecting that people go change that password immediately, and not thinking that the fact that they're using stupid passwords for, initial password set, that is a huge problem in enterprises. Still, even with good enterprises that have policies, you have help desk people that get into a routine. They just do it. They make it easy. They have an issue with, a doctor or something that yelled at them and they got in trouble because they made the password too complex on the first time. So now they just use change me. So there's usually reasons behind some of it, not that they're acceptable, but we also have to look at the psychology of why people do some of the stuff they do.
Yeah, Jeff, in back in the day, in earlier days of Sec 617, the wireless class, we used to bring up PCI when we started talking about pre-shared key networks, because I think many of the folks don't realize when you talk about changing the vendor defaults, that a vendor default network name, the friendly name, the SSID, is in fact used as part of the password for pre-shared key. It's used to derive the password. And I think our argument was, like, if you're in a PCI environment, you're required to change defaults, change the damn default SSID because it's part of your password, or it becomes part of your password.
Who remembers community strings?
Oh God, yes. Public and private.
I mean, there's still hardware devices out there that use like the MAC address as the default base password, even if you've changed stuff like that.
So going back to that drinking question, which beverage of choice? I think I've graduated over the years from beer to wine to hard liquor. Just saying.
Yep.
I have a question on that report. Did it? I didn't get to look at it all. Did it bring out anything about most common passwords in ICS environments?
I haven't looked at the report proper yet. I was reading the article and I saw it had a link to the report, and I was excited that it went right to the actual report without having to type in my name and address and budget for the year. Yep. So I have honestly not even opened it up and looked at it yet.
Okay.
Yep, Mandy, that's a great question, and you're saying that, and back to my, what have you been working on lately? I have a mountain of data.
Yeah.
I don't.
ICS password?
I have a mountain of data of close to 1 million binaries from many industries.
Really?
Yeah. That Yeah. And in fact, I was actually looking at some of that type of stuff today, just out of curiosity to get myself familiar with some of that data, and it was shocking. So I don't know specifically ICS, but we definitely delve into the ICS industry, and yeah.
That would be fascinating. I would love to know that.
Yep. Interesting.
It's bugging me now. I'm still trying to remember the default Cisco password. It might have been Cisco. Anyway.
I thought it was too. I thought it was Cisco.
I think it was Cisco. Anyway, moving on.
In any case, how about where did it go? I was just going to look up bad things. How about Sam's story number 3, the POC for the Microsoft Word RCE one? Is that one of the, Mandy, that was one of the ones we talked about earlier on, yes?
Yes, I definitely want to know about that.
Yep. So Sam, Tyler, I think you had the story too.
Yeah. Well, I didn't see anything terribly exciting about it, except just you got to patch your Microsoft an RTFL heap corruption vulnerability, and it's got an exploit small enough to hit in a tweet. So
140 characters?
Yes. And so you just have a bunch of punctuation marks, and it causes, I think, a crash. They don't actually have a public proof of concept that does remote code execution, but it certainly can. So this is one of those things you have to patch in a hurry, and it's got a 9.8 out of 10 severity, so that's pretty awful.
Ironically, we're in March now.
Well, there's
what was February's patch Tuesday? What was the date of it?
Second Tuesday, I guess. So
it
should be patched by now.
It should almost be patched by now if you've got the requirement to patch within 30 days.
We'll see if that patch actually stands. Let's say that there are ways around it, and or this is being exploited in the wild in many places. So,
with or without the patch?
That's what we're trying to figure out.
Okay.
We're working through how this is actually applying. There's an issue with the font library and the way that it's calling a large number of fonts for the library that allows this heap overflow. So you can do some interesting things with that, even with a patch, causing the trigger for excessive font requested to maybe bypass some of the filters. So we'll see. I'm not sure if what we're working on is going to work, but we're seeing it in the wild, and we're seeing people that should be patched that are still getting exploited. So definitely something to look for and block. There's a bunch of ways that you can actually kind of fix this from a preemptive standpoint. The Office file block, which is part of the attack surface reduction rules, can block this via GPO or Intune policy at the domain level. You can do that for your local workstation at the registry level, I believe. And that should be the setting that blocks untrusted RTF documents. Then it won't execute that portion of it until you actually hit the warning sign. So your users still have a way around the warning on that piece. So patch, and then make sure you've got the warnings in place, as well as blocking things at your edge and your spam or firewall. O365 Defender's got a bunch of heuristics on it, and Intune is blocking that from attack surface reduction rules.
So I have a stupid old-timer question real quick, Tyler. You mentioned heap overflow. Is that more analogous to buffer overflow or stack overflow?
Yeah, very, very similar. So you're basically causing a corruption in the function that has a library tied to that function. So it's building that heap in memory, and by calling that font that is larger than the allocated memory space, that becomes a heap overflow of that particular function in memory. If I'm remembering that right.
Sam's shaking his head emphatically.
Yeah, it's the same thing as a stack overflow.
Okay.
The only difference is on the heap, it's a little tougher to exploit because you don't have a return pointer there.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Awesome. What else we got?
Mandy.
Is Mandy leaving us?
I am leaving.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Farewell.
Thank you all. And I really liked the explanation on the heap overflow. Good question, Jeff. Good answer, Tyler.
Thanks, Mandy.
Well,
Sam.
Well, I'd like to talk about my first one, which really caught my attention whenever they say they have perfect security.
Go for it.
Okay, so these guys claim they have perfect security in steganography, and I immediately thought this is garbage. Put steganography in an image, for example.
Unsyncable.
Is compare it to the unaltered image, and you can tell there's been altered. So there's steganography in there. So you have to read it more carefully. What they have done is this. If you have a message that contains a lot of a cover message that is long and complicated and not a duplicate of a well-known message. So it is it's either random noise or it is some text created by an AI, like paragraphs of text. Then you can take a key and you can use that key to guide you at changing it to hide a message inside there. And you can do it with what's called a minimum entropy transformation. And what that does is it doesn't change any measurable statistical property of the message. So you cannot do any statistical test to tell the message that has a second message hidden in it from the message that doesn't have a second message hidden in it. So that is pretty, from sort of theoretical point of view.
Quick clarification. I think you're talking about your story 16.
Number 1.
Oh, my number 1.
It's 16 on my page. About steganography?
Yep.
That's weird.
Number 1.
Yep, my number 1. Maybe somebody else's 16. Yeah.
Oh, no.
But I mean, and that's the sense in which it's perfect. I'm not sure exactly how much difference this will make in practice, but I suppose it's another possible security issue of AI. If you have AI-generated text, then you have no way to know if there's another message hidden in it. But I think the same thing would be true if you had emails written by humans. There's no way in principle to ever be sure they haven't hidden a second message in there.
Let's see here. I got one story that was a carryover from last week that we didn't hit, and it's come up a bunch of times in recent weeks for me. My story number 7. 40% of Log4j downloads still vulnerable. Tyler's like, what?
How is that?
People actually downloading old versions deliberately?
Yeah.
Why?
I don't know.
Is there some category of software that can't run the new version and has to run the old version or something?
It's gotta be.
What's your gut telling you is the root cause analysis?
I don't.
I'm guessing it's not people haven't patched their systems.
Oh, I bet it's still that. I bet there are still folks out there that are developing that don't know it's an issue. We're started to go add Log4j before they knew it was an issue, and that was what was available on whatever system they're on. Or maybe on some legacy system, and they're going to improve security by adding logging, right? And that's what's available in their package manager. I'm guessing.
I'm going to say, is it maybe part of an automated build process that has those libraries as part of a particular version to pull from, or repos that maybe have not been updated that are being utilized for dev projects as part of the pipeline?
Could
be some of it.
I mean, I think some other ones too that
somebody else is patching it. I don't have to.
Somebody else is patching it. My world lately is around software bill of materials, and I think there are still so many folks that are using some of this type of stuff that don't know that they have Log4j, and they go and pull a download for something, and it's the vulnerable version because they don't know it's there. I'm guessing maybe it's somebody take over some legacy code and hasn't thought about dealing with it. I think really the question here is, what they're saying is why 40% is still vulnerable. I don't know.
So I think you're probably onto something, in terms of there's the building blocks, things that they're using. I don't know what you call them. Architectures, frameworks, code snippets, whatever that you're pulling in. Why aren't those people updating it? Why aren't they updating that code that's been put out there? Are they losing track of where they've shared it? The people that originated it? Is there a lack of ownership?
It's not in the news, so no one cares.
Yeah.
If I was running this repository, I would be tempted to stop honoring requests for the old version and force people to update that way.
Yep.
I'm not sure I'd want to keep handing out an old version with this series of vulnerability.
Yeah, I guess I think you're
Unless you're a
going where
criminal.
I'm trying to go, Sam, is, I'm not trying to figure out who's at fault for it being still out there and not being fixed, but who's at fault for not preventing it from being used anymore. Who's the watchdog?
Yep. So I did, as we were talking about, I did a little bit more digging. Right in the beginning of the article, there's another link to a dark reading page, and it says that more than 4 in 10 downloads of the logging tool from the Maven Central Java package repository continue to be known vulnerable downloads. Let's see. Bunch of vulnerabilities. Sonatype's dashboards show that there have been more than 31.4 million downloads of Log4j in total since December 10th, 2021. It's unclear by how many of those are vulnerable versions, but by going by the latest download statistics, the number could be well near or in excess of 10 million if you take that 4 out of 10. So the likely culprit is likely automated build systems. If the maintainer of that software hasn't been paying attention to the news surrounding Log4j, their application is left open to the risk of exploitation.
Yeah, but that's you have an abscess, you have an open wound. That's not addressing. You've got a tumor underneath.
Right.
Who's looking for the tumors? Whose responsibility is it to look for the tumors?
Exactly.
Who's policing all of this?
And
is this addressed by the U.S. cybersecurity strategy?
It's open source. It's community driven.
Segue
into the cybersecurity strategy. Jeff, did you have that story listed?
I had some variation of it.
How will the government enforce the national cybersecurity strategy? Jeff's story number 5. Jeff, I think first we need to understand a little bit about what the U.S. national cybersecurity strategy is all about. And specifically, I think I forgot to do something. But that's okay.
Oops.
Oh, no, I also have my story number 4, a day later, analyzing Biden's national security cyber strategy.
Yeah, I think that was the story that I saw. I had a story also, but yours was like the day later, which is providing, I think, a little bit more analysis or summary.
Yep.
I've not read the actual cybersecurity strategy itself, so I'm relying on the journalists that have actually tried to summarize it.
Yep, and I suspect Tyler's probably did a good read of this. Yes, he's smiling.
He might have wrote half of it.
There's some good stuff there. There's quite a bit around the collaboration with private entities in working groups with government that facilitate a better relationship and we'll call it oversight or purview that help in a lot of situations. So there's good things in here.
But isn't oversight just a different word for compliance?
We'll say maybe less oversight and more interoperability and cooperation with coverage. How about that?
And how does cooperation work in a capitalist society, Tyler? What are your thoughts on that?
I think there's a lot of corporations that have donated R&D time and or work with inside of working groups, whether that's with the government or on their own, in order to take actions that are effective, that just make the world a safer place. And in turn, they justify that by saying that allows their customers and hence the business the customers are able to do with them a safer environment, more money, less loss, all of those things. That's kind of the justification that's been given. And so far that seems to work well for a lot of the bigger agencies or bigger corporations. We'll say some of the smaller ones, it's a little harder to get buy-in on that, but there's still more or less a ton of donated time that just comes from good people. So less than capitalistic and more you have first world problems, so you have the ability to and the means to donate a little bit of extra time and or cooperate with these working groups. So I think that is working from a capitalistic standpoint at its core.
So the article of mine that you had, Jeff, in full disclosure, it's a blog post from Finite State that I had some hand in helping write. So,
which paragraph is yours?
While it's disappointing that we're needing to rely on the government to start mandating perceived minimum security standard, it will likely over time improve the industry. Initial versions of the PCI standards were viewed as a box to check for compliance, but they have ultimately changed how organizations think about security. That is...
Wait, you gave a shout out to PCI?
I did. That is, they are now often going above and beyond the bare minimum. This is something we need to see more of in product security, and not just those products associated with critical infrastructure.
You're putting a tear in my eye.
Thought leader. Sorry, if you can't laugh at yourself, who can you laugh at? But
all right. So, going back, it's disappointing that we're needing to rely on the government to mandate. That's what PCI tried to avoid in the first place. The reason that PCI exists, at the time, Visa was a private company, and they didn't want the government getting in there.
So they did it themselves.
Their financial shorts.
Yep.
And so they did it themselves, and they were big enough that they could, all the card brands had their own programs initially, and PCI was the culmination of them deciding we should just agree on one single standard, and that's what gave birth to the PCI standard. I think it's ironic that I grew up in an organization, I cut my teeth in an organization whose entire mission was information security, and it was the government, and it was, protecting secrets. And so it was absolutely the government. And then I went out into the private sector, and a lot of people went out into the private sector, and it was the understanding for a long time that if you wanted to get something done, if you wanted to have real innovation, you had to do it in the private sector because government was too slow, too monolithic. There was too many things in the way in terms of bureaucracy and all that kind of stuff, which I still think is largely true. I just think it's funny that the government, how many years later, is coming out with a position paper saying we need to do more, and all the people that rail in our community on government intervention and government mandating things, when the really bad stuff has happened, which we've covered over the last couple of years, various, really bad vulnerabilities and really prolific vulnerabilities that are found in things that we've been using for 10, 15, 20 years, everybody just kind of, or critical infrastructure, another good example, everybody's kind of like, nothing's going to change until the government steps in and mandates something. So we all sort of acknowledge that they need to do that, which, again, that's compliance. If you ask me why I liked PCI, is because I grew up in an organization that had an organized approach to security, and when I went out into the private sector, PCI was the first thing that I saw that was sort of the closest mirroring of this is a comprehensive view of how you build an information or data security program in an organization. And that's why I love PCI. How it's become a checkbox, and how do we avoid it? How do we make it go away? Yep. That's what I hate about PCI.
Yep. I think Eric Greenwald, the author here, I love working with Eric. He's a hot ticket, as they would say. But for someone that is now in private sector and has a really good grasp of, taking what some of that executive order language really means, he's got a really good perspective. To toot his horn a little bit, he was the special assistant to the president and senior director for cybersecurity on the National Security Council, principal deputy director of the FBI's National Cyber Investigative Joint Task Force, and chief counsel for the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, and served as an attorney advisor of the CIA's Office of General Counsel. He's been at that level often enough and long enough to be able to take that language and to turn that back into private practice, to be able to turn that into something that we can understand.
You had me up until he's a lawyer. Okay.
Now he admittedly he's a lawyer, and I'll say this: his icon in our internal Slack is a picture of Lionel Hutz from The Simpsons standing next to a dumpster on fire, and it says "Protecting Client Dumpster Confidentiality." He's a lawyer, but he gets it.
He knows he's a lawyer.
But he knows he's a lawyer, and he can poke fun at himself, and knows where that those lawyer things are always, perceived as being bad. So Eric had some really good some good things here. And Tyler, you said, lots of good stuff here. The forge partnerships to pursue shared goals. The intent to invest in a resilient future, shape the market to drive security features, defend critical infrastructure. I think is a big one. But I think we can take what we learned from that, based on my paragraph there, to move on to other stuff.
I will sit down and read the strategy at some point. I just haven't had a chance to yet. But Tyler's brought up capitalism and the economic perspective. I think ultimately it still boils down to, and what most organizations and companies and utilities, critical infrastructure, which very often are run by municipalities, so it's government. Mm-hmm. It all boils down to who's going to pay for it. And I don't know what the strategy says in terms of hinting at does it acknowledge that it's something that, this is going to come at a cost, and who's going to pay for it? I don't know if that's what I'm looking for in the strategy, to see if there's hints of, this is going to come in the form of, government subsidy, which ultimately means it's coming from the taxpayers and we're all going to pay for it, which I'm not necessarily opposed to when it comes to critical infrastructure. But does it quantify? And
based on one of the things that's in the article and as in the National Cybersecurity Strategy, I think one of the things that due to my day job, is that one of the things it calls out is software bill of materials, mm-hmm. and that if you want to start working and be in contract with the federal government for IT services and so forth, and you're providing an IT project to the federal government, you need to provide it doesn't say accurate, but I argue accurate, software bill of materials as part of your deployment. And arguably who's going to pay for that is that the company that is trying to get that contract to the federal government is going to be the one ultimately paying whatever cost, whether it be soft and so forth. But the companies are going to be the one to pay for
on their cost to the consumer,
and then they're going to pay for that cost off to the consumer, which is the federal government, which is
so the bottom line
tax
is
dollars.
We're all going to pay for
we're all going to
one way or the other.
And I don't mind paying my couple of dollars to help protect my critical infrastructure and set the path to help other stuff move forward, and that's fine. All right, what's next?
Tyler, Sam, pick a story. Tyler hasn't picked one yet.
He's got to pick from somebody else's stories.
Hey,
come on now.
I don't know. I really like the UEFI one, but we've kind of talked about that, and Paul's not here, so no one can get scared about it.
That's why I said nothing to see here. Move along. I just threw it up there because it was a new article on last week's news.
Yeah, it was pretty good. There is malware using, Stealthy secure boot bypass, and there's a vulnerability in a Windows flaw for secure boot. So definitely something to keep an eye on. Larry, your HDMI radio one was interesting. I was looking at that one. I told myself I could not dive in all the way right now, but it was really interesting.
And it's kind of interesting. And I cannot pronounce her last name for the life of me. And I've seen a bunch of her work from Windy Tan, Una, and I can't pronounce her last name. Raisinet? I don't know. But it turns out she was doing some, software-defined radio spectrum browsing stuff and came across some interference. And upon further inspection of that interference, she was recovering some effective buzz at a harmonic for some video signal coming from an HDMI cable. And she really went and did some deep analysis of what it took to send the data from that HDMI cable and what she was seeing in the individual waveform to represent individual components of that HDMI transmission, including colors and others, to be able to effectively recreate the bit stream from the RF leakage from an HDMI cable to recover some really good video. And actually you noted that when there were pixel changes going top to bottom were easier to decipher than going right to left for whatever reason. And whoa, yeah. This has been, Van Eck stuff has been around for a long, long time.
Probably longer than you realize.
Yes. But
which is why I won't comment much on this article.
Yep.
Well, there was not exactly the similar research, but the AI algorithm to take brain scan waves and brain waves and recreate just from a thought, recreate either the image or whatever you were looking at or thinking about. So essentially mind reading using AI via wavelengths and synaptic pathways. Very, very similar, just at the hardware level.
That actually sounds extremely plausible.
Yep.
Because our brain's interpreting it somehow and translating it. So why not be able to capture that and reproduce it? I hope nobody plugs into my brain, by the way.
Oh, man.
Anytime soon.
Yeah, terrifying.
Yep. So some other things that came out of her sort of end research type of stuff. She was able to, because it's now transmitting bits, she could potentially modify the source bits to do binary exfiltration, aka video over video. Like steganographically hide video within the HDMI stream from computer to laptop. And was able to get 1,000 kilobaud of data from the CPU to the monitor.
So I'm jumping down towards I thought it was the end, but it's probably the middle of the article where she talks about mitigations and she's showing a picture of the monitor wrapped in foil.
Yep.
And then she said she tried chicken wire, and immediately I thought, did she try copper? Because I used to work in a building that was copper clad.
Yep.
Because of emanations.
Yep.
And I'm curious as to whether she tried that. And what's the difference between what's being leaked? Is it a sound wave or radio wave? What kind of wave is it? And would copper make a?
It's a radio wave. It's electromagnetic interference, effectively. So it's radio.
Try copper.
Arguably, aluminum foil over the monitor wasn't going to help because my understanding is the EM was from the actual, cable itself.
The cable, not the monitor.
You need to use a shielded cable because the cable's acting as an antenna. Copper would probably be better. I also would argue
Isn't chicken wire also aluminum?
It's probably zinc-coated steel or...
Yeah, I was going to say zinc steel.
Zinc steel, okay.
Yep. But I know I have...
I use a higher quality chicken wire.
Yep, copper would definitely be... Grounded copper would be definitely better. Mm-hmm. Shielded with copper. I would also argue that it depends on
lead.
the actual...
Superman always,
depend on the actual wavelength, because if you use chicken wire with a 1-inch hole and the wavelength is smaller than 1 inch, it can still fit through.
Right.
It's a reason why it's called chicken wire, because chickens can't fit through it. Right. So same sort of thing with the radio wave there.
Still not going to talk about the article.
This seems like a really cool data exfil and or C2 method.
Yep. I agreed. Video over video.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. What was the video at the very end? There was the video over video. She has a demonstration of a hidden webcam broadcasting via HDMI cable.
That's cool.
Yep.
That's a lot of research. Like that's some no joke playing with some radio that is a little bit. Man, that's some difficult stuff that she figured out.
Yep. I mean, she is a super smart brain. I would argue that the blog post that she has does not do any of the research that she actually did any justice. Like, hey, I did this and I had this, and like, how many weeks of frustration did it actually take for her to figure some of this stuff out? So, yeah. Next.
Yeah, if you're good, I'd like to talk about my number 9, polynonch.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. Elliptic curve digital signatures are used all over the place. They're in a standard, and they're used in the Bitcoin blockchain. And they found a flaw here, which is very interesting. There's a nonce you have to add, a number you're only supposed to use once, and nonce is supposed to be random, but most people feel like it doesn't really matter how random it is, so you can just use a cheap random number generator that's not all that random, and that turns out to be extremely not true. If you have several signatures using the same private key, and the nonces are mathematically related to each other by a polynomial, then if you have polynomial of order 3 and you have like 6 signatures, there's enough information there to solve the equation, find the parameters of the polynomial, and mathematically extract the private key.
Tyler's eyes
Hold
just
on, I
got
gotta
really.
look up what a polynomial
Tyler's
is. 'Cause I
eyes just got really wide, and I don't blame him.
I haven't talked about a polynomial in 30
Polynomial
years.
is just the simplest mathematical curves. A straight line is a polynomial, and a parabola is the next polynomial. And if you just take the simplest case, if you use the same nonce twice and sign things, then you might have to use the same nonce 3 or 4 times. But if you use the same nonce several times, then you can mathematically extract the private key. It's not even a brute force attack. It's just an analytical mathematical process.
It's called depth.
Yes, and this actually happened in practice. They went through the Bitcoin blockchain, and they found 762 private keys had been used with the same nonce, and they got the private key. They actually extracted 762 real Bitcoin private keys with this attack, and they found that all those accounts are empty because hackers got there before them and stole the Bitcoin. So this is bloody awesome, and I think it is another hole in ECDSA that people need to know about. It's another pitfall. If you've seen the video saying how bad RSA is, it says people should quit using RSA because it turns out there's so many ways to choose a bad prime number and hurt it, and it looks like there are some gotchas in elliptic curve cryptography too, where you can do something that seems harmless and it destroys it.
I'm currently reading right with Audible Tracers in the Dark by Andy Greenberg. I think I mentioned this last week. It's the global hunt for the crime lords of cryptocurrency, and like, just I'm only a little bit in. I'm only about 2 hours into an 8-hour book, and like this whole thing like just now blows my mind because we're talking Silk Road and theft of stuff, and
people have been trying to make the big blockchain forever because Satoshi Nakamoto left an unthinkable amount of money there, like trillions of dollars, if anybody could only find his private key. But he didn't make this mistake. They were not able to get in that one.
Right, because you have to have enough transactions, and he hasn't done any transactions out of that wallet. They have not done any transactions out of that wallet.
That's right. There's an unthinkable amount of money just sitting there for anybody that can crack into it. It's like the world's biggest CTF.
Yep.
That,
I mean, if you could only
somewhere in Tyler's house.
Yeah, I was going to say if you could only find your wallet, right, Tyler?
Damn.
So Tyler,
maybe we just crack it.
I was going to say that'd be an interesting one, Tyler, to see if there were any transactions with that wallet that were documented on the blockchain, if it would be vulnerable to this attack. I would argue not, because that analysis had already been done and it's empty. They were empty.
It reminds me of when I went to Hope, like maybe 4 years ago, and live on stage, they showed that there were automated bots running to crack Bitcoin wallets based on weak passwords, and they made a wallet right there with like a 6-character password and just watched, and within 30 seconds, the money vanished. It's bloody awesome.
Yikes.
So if it's any consolation, Tyler, your money's probably already gone.
That's right. If you involved in this attack, it would already be gone. Although I think the criminals only found the simplest version where you have to use the exact same nonce twice. These guys found a more complicated version where even if you use a different nonce, if those nonces are mathematically related, you can still get in. Yep. So you might get lucky if your product that you used was only a medium security, not stupid enough to use the same nonce twice, but stupid enough to use nonces in a pattern, then you might be able to get your money back.
It was a long time ago, so that is possible.
I can see the wheel. I can literally see the wheels turning across the camera for Tyler.
The software, it's open source, and it took them like 2 days on a GPU with like 256 cores or something. So they say they spent like $500 of CPU time in a cloud machine to crack these. So that's how possible it is.
And I was going to say they probably got their money back when they emptied the wallets. Oh no, wait, they were already empty.
Well, and it was about $4 million that they found people had been stolen or more. So it was not small amounts that had been stolen from this attack. Wow. Right. This is what 5 years ago, a lot of people said the blockchain is secure. And of course, there are still mistakes to be made.
Of course.
It has large parts of it are secure, but there are mistakes to be made, and people have made them.
Yep. They also touted that, well, there were non-authors of the blockchain that said that the blockchain was untraceable. And reading through Andy Greenberg's book, we've known that it wasn't, but they're going through the story about proving how it wasn't.
Well,
That was on purpose.
Well, Zcash, I think, was actually untraceable, although nobody uses it.
Right.
You could actually have, but Bitcoin, no, absolutely not.
Hey, don't give away our secrets. Zcash is the shit.
No.
So what you're alluding to is, I think, also comes out in, Sam, your story number 11, a vulnerability in implementations of SHA-3, Shake, and DSA, and other NIST-approved algorithms.
Which is my story number 12 for whatever reason, but
All right, we'll do Larry's story number 12 for equity's sake. Go.
either way, it's the SHA-3, Shake, and EDSA.
Yep.
Yeah. It's not a mathematical flaw. It's just an error in the proof of concept code, which is the NIST standard reference code, which everybody's using. And this is a thing I heard on a podcast from the developer of Zcash. He said, never use anything written by an academic. Right? Crappy code. As an academic, I must say I understand, because they're just trying to prove the concept. They do not know how to think about what you need in production code.
Right.
And so they wrote this code, but it's the reference implementation at NIST, and it just makes elementary errors. It uses 32-bit integers and mixes them with 64-bit integers and casts them wrong. So there's an integer overflow that can lead to a buffer overflow. But
what about, what is the implementation error, and what can be done to correct it?
Well, people have to write better code than just use the library that would have got from NIST. So OpenSSL apparently did, and their product is not vulnerable, but a lot of PHP and other software is using the reference code, and that makes it vulnerable. It is a shame when the official approved code is not secure.
So the implementation of the default as-is code is vulnerable.
Yeah.
You need to
SHA-3.
tweak it a
Of course, that's the other good thing about it. It's SHA-3, which nobody's using, I think. So we caught this one time, I think, and there's actually talking about improving vulnerability scanning for reference code from now on, which is something they should probably be doing.
That's interesting.
And
But they were just thinking about proving the mathematics right and not thinking about writing secure code, really.
There you go. I can see
right.
that.
Always the implementation.
Always.
Well, sometimes it's the math. Like that Bitcoin attack, it's actually the math itself. But in this case, it's just the implementation.
Well, it's the math itself, but I mean, what was enabling the
Implementation
reuse
of the
of a
math.
nonce? Was it
using random nonce.
Right.
No, that was a question. What was enabling the reuse of a nonce?
Oh, well, the problem is, in that case, the nonce thing was not an issue of reference code. There was a mathematical protocol to make an elliptic curve signature, and people had to write code. And it's a good question. You could look in the RFC that defines it and see, does it really tell you to use a random nonce or not? I don't know. Does it really tell you how random it has to be or not? I bet it doesn't. And then it's up to the developer to sort of judge how random it has to be. And they probably don't realize that it has to be very random.
Right. It reminds me of one of the, and tying back to some wireless experience, one of the old failures with WEP is that they said that the nonce in WEP should be unique.
Should.
They didn't say it must be unique because in the implementation they had no way to track whether or not the nonce had already been used.
Right.
You know how many times the word "should" was used in PCI DSS version 1?
A lot. Do you know do you know how many Europeans are laughing at us because of how many times we've said nonce?
All of them that are listening to us.
Yes.
Does not mean something else over there?
It does. It does. Specifically to the folks in the UK or the Brits. Yeah. It's a if I remember correctly, it's something referring to the male genitalia. So they're laughing at us now.
It's for number used only once.
Number
should.
Yep.
Anyway.
All right, Sam. I know you need to go, so let's. Jeff, why don't you pick another story here?
All right.
Catch you off guard here.
If I'm allowed to choose one of my own,
Of course you are.
I had a couple, hopefully more philosophical, thought-provoking type of articles.
Tyler, think about a story you want to pick next.
You're on deck, Tyler. My number, to between 2 and 3. Let's go with number 2. U.S. Special Forces wants to use deepfakes for psyops.
Oh.
And of course, the people that wrote this article are quoting people saying, this is a bad thing. Just because we're able to do it, we shouldn't be doing it. It's bad and evil, and we tell people not to do it and not to use it, now to look out for it, and then to turn around and use it.
I mean, what's really off the table in psyops, right?
Nothing. You want to be secure. You want to fight evil. Give me a break.
I mean, it's kind of like we don't torture people.
Yeah, my ass.
Yeah. Yeah, it's called waterboarding, right?
We don't assassinate people either.
There's just a lot of people that just can't deal with the fact that there's a pointy end and people have to do dirty things, and they have no empathy for the things that have to be done to make this place what it is.
Yep.
So
you want me on this wall. You need me on this wall.
Arguably, should this be something that comes up at some sort of, war crimes negotiation, tribunal negotiation type of thing? Should we have something like this be one of those types of things that is, quote, regulated? But will the folks that don't care still do it? I mean, yes, they will. And
why regulate it is my question, because this is a much better option than, say, stealing someone's kids and wife and using the psyops of potential torture and exploitation of those versus actually having to do it. So if we can make the illusion of doing it, that is a much better outcome and option than actually having to do it. So
I mean, there is that side of that. I definitely agree that it's using the virtual is better than the actual physical harm that could be caused. Yep. But arguably, what's the end result, and what other harm is being done to other folks potentially? Yep. Like if you're doing psyops against a large community of people, and potentially they're convinced to do something bad that injures 100,000 of those people.
Yeah. Well, so then you also have to ask the question: is like other countries are going to do this? They're not going to have the same qualms and people that are going to throw a fit about this. So either we are going to do it and put some structure around it, or we're not going to do it and lose a tool that is capable of doing those things. I can see societal issues with this for sure.
What did we used to call this back in the day? Propaganda.
Propaganda.
This is all about propaganda.
Yep.
And why not use every tool available in the arsenal?
Yep. I mean, this goes back to one of my favorite stories about my decent friend. I won't say my good friend, but my friend Stephen Northcutt, who may have, I had this conversation with Mike Poor, also a great friend of Stephen Northcutt, that he may have been he may be the individual responsible for the fall of Russia and ending the Cold War, because he was the one that came up with the PSYOPs program for Star Wars.
Right.
With President Reagan. He came up with the idea and developed the program to have President Reagan get on television and say, we've got these satellites that can use lasers and shoot down ICBMs, so that if Russia shoots something at us, we're just going to shoot them down, and then we're going to destroy Russia. And Russia bankrupted themselves trying to keep up with the neighbors.
Steal.
Either way,
design, come up.
They bankrupted themselves trying to have a competing Star Wars program, which allowed the Cold War to end. And I won't say whether or not who won, because that's still potentially debatable given where we are today. But that's
good use of funds.
What's that?
Good use of funds, rather than actually having to go over there and destroy them and bankrupt them from the inside out. We just use PSYOPs. So
yep, we just said something that we actually couldn't do, and nobody could prove it, and we had all the documentation that could prove that we could, even if it was fake. Like, it worked.
Which is a technique that's been used for millennia. We just we do it in more scary ways these days.
Agreed.
The article raises a question in my mind, and I don't know the answer to this, and I'm interested in finding out. But I used to work for a 3-letter agency, and there's a couple 3-letter agencies that we like to talk about and berate and worry about their power and the abuse of their power. And some of my experience at that 3-letter agency involved something known as the church proceedings, which was a Senate subcommittee that was formed after the Watergate break-in way back in the early 70s, before all of you were born. And basically it led to regulation, and I use that term loosely, by the government of the 3-letter agencies up until the time of Watergate. And the result of the Senate subcommittee, the church proceedings, was these 3-letter agencies have lots of scary capability and power, and nothing's regulating where and when and how and who they use it against. And that's when things came up like the NSA charter that says the NSA can only do what NSA does to foreigners, to non-U.S. citizens, and specifically can't do what NSA does to U.S. citizens.
Yep.
Then 9/11, Patriot Act, Snowden, WikiLeaks, all that. That's a whole different topic. But what I'm curious about is, okay, so there's sorry, I didn't hit the button. Government regulation and oversight for NSA, CIA, and FBI. I don't know what the oversight is for Socom.
Interesting.
And I mean, that's an open question. I will try to find out the answer because I'm curious myself. And if I find out an answer, I'll let everybody know.
I'm sure there's a Senate committee that has some.
Maybe, but I mean, I don't know. Look what Clint Eastwood was able to do in Grenada.
So Jeff, we were talking a little bit about, I mean, we were talking a little bit about this before the segment, and it's getting to be old a little bit, but your story number 9, employees are feeding sensitive biz data to ChatGPT, raising security fears.
Mm-hmm.
And we were talking about ChatGPT, and you were like, you did my classic line, save it for the show.
That's right.
Because I used ChatGPT for work this week. I needed to write some regex, and ChatGPT did a great job of writing that regex for me. And arguably, it was some fairly simple regex, but I suck at regex. So, like, this was amazing that it could write a regex for something like this. And it wasn't, and we talk about feeding sensitive business data. This was not sensitive business data. It's parsing some numbers in a numeric string.
But it does beg the question and I have not looked at ChatGPT, so I don't know what it is. I'm assuming it's a website you go to.
Yep.
What happens to the data that anybody puts into it?
Exactly. And you log in, and based on that login, it does keep your question history when it actually works. And I don't know if I'm assuming that based on that history, it keeps the answers that it gives you. Tyler's shaking his head yes.
Yep.
So.
And all right, so Tyler knows. So is it using the inputs of everybody that's using ChatGPT to feed its algorithm, to feed its learning
it's
curve beyond your account?
That is a great question, and at some point someone will come up with a clear answer that is actually definitive from a source that is definitive.
So yes, until proven differently.
Yeah,
I would assume yes.
Outside of that, like, I think the bigger issue is how much do we trust OpenAI, and or how OpenAI is able to fund ChatGPT at $100,000 or almost $200,000 a day right now, just in infrastructure and compute costs. So, like, if I were them, I would be selling everything getting put into that into an intelligence and or further model and learning platform for later for, say, government use. Yep. If it were me, or threat intelligence platform.
Yep.
So
I mean
100% there's secrets in there.
From what I understand, and again, I'm sort of new with the whole AI type of thing, but it's a natural language based learning platform, meaning it needs language to train its model. And
but the model was already trained, right?
Right. And every question you ask is more natural language that can be used to train the model. And every piece of feedback that it gets about the output is more data to train the model based on the natural language of the correction of mistakes and so forth.
Yeah, I'm just curious if the model bleeds over from the original neural network and training data set that they used, which was old data back in like 2020.
Yep.
I'm curious if that neural network is cross training at all, which there's a lot of speculation.
Yeah, and I kind of argue that it is. As a lark, we were joking around that Josh Wright wrote a tool many years ago in C called file to air for taking a single packet libpcap file and sending it into the air for doing Wi-Fi hacking. And we've been after Josh to rewrite this in Python and Scapy for a long time. And just as a joke, James Vidal said, we should totally use ChatGPT to rewrite it for us. So I'm like, I got 5 minutes at lunchtime. So I fired up ChatGPT and asked ChatGPT to write file to air by Joshua Wright in Python. And it did something, and it found a README, and it implemented two functions. The README basically says, at a minimum, you need to give it an input file and a wireless adapter. So it wrote a function that took an input file and it sent it out that wireless adapter and could do it to broadcast based on what it README. So it could effectively do one function. But what really makes the tool useful is that it has about 13 to 14 other command line options for being able to modify the packets before they're transmitted, and it didn't do any of that. So the next iteration I asked, hey, given the source code here, do it again. And it did the same thing. So even providing the source code, it had the same thing. The third time I asked, I said, given this source code, rewrite it and include all of the command line options. It included all of the command line options from the source code, which was the only place that was documented. It wasn't in the README. Mm-hmm. But there was no code that actually did anything with those command line options. You could define the command line option, and then there was no function to actually address it.
It is not very good at coding or coding securely, like looking at the training model that it's used. Like, it doesn't have good reference points. So you look at like something like Stack Overflow, right? Like the difference between good answers and bad answers and ones that work and ones that don't, like that's a lot of code to parse through, and it doesn't distinguish between all those. So I would argue that it is not fantastic at complex like reprogramming or architecture. There's some things that work great. I'm worried about how many things like API keys, like you're doing some multifunction, like go to this website, acquire this data using this API key, bring back that data, transform it and ingest it into this other service or API, and build a function that does that in Rust. Like now you got API keys in there and you've got access to different platforms and or secure URLs or internal stuff. Like I know people are doing this. So like where is this data getting saved and is it being leveraged and accessed later?
Interesting.
You know, back in the 60s, there's this cutting edge sci-fi show called Star Trek.
I'm familiar with it.
And I don't know what season it was off the top of my head. Actually, I'm looking at it here. It's season 2, episode 24. So that would have been 1968.
Okay.
They had an episode called The Ultimate Computer, where they had a supercomputer that was using our vernacular, had a computer that was AI, that was intelligent and learning, and they installed it in the Enterprise, removed the entire crew because the computer was going to do everything. And of course, things went haywire, and it turns out that the computer was, in a war game exercise, was actually shooting live fire and killing hundreds of people on actual Federation ships. And at the end of the day, it turned out that the scientist that had built the thing, he had basically copied his brain and emulated his brain to make they had terminology for it, but his brain was basically the model for the computer, and he happened to be clinically insane. Oops.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, the thing I think that's
it's not a new idea.
Yeah, right. The thing that I think is absolutely amazing is that Star Trek, those science fiction visionaries from the 60s, how many things from Star Trek have they actually talked about that was not a thing, has come to life? Yeah. Your tricorder in your pocket. It's called your cell phone.
The tricorder.
The AI based on someone who's a clinically insane. Like, that may be the model that ChatGPT is trained from, given the content on the internet out there. Like, if you take the content of the internet as a whole and you were to analyze all that, you'd probably find that the internet is clinically insane. I like.
I think the other real scary thing with ChatGPT 2 is the fact that there are many development and or SaaS applications that are on the backside implementing and leveraging ChatGPT API in order to do stuff with their own platform and or data. Say something like Notion. Notion has, by default now, the ability to have ChatGPT like write your notes given a particular topic or organize something right in the application. And they're not the only ones. There's tons of them. So what ChatGPT and ChatGPT's API has access to, again, from an intelligence agency standpoint, this would be 100% where I'd be investing all my money.
Yep. And you know, related, and I didn't add this story to the show notes because I'm just realizing it now, because I actually had some discussion with some folks, believe it or not, at our local farm, with the farmers, who are super smart and awesome people, was along the lines of using AI to generate art and so forth. And we talk about this, you know, the pointy end of the spear using deep fakes for psyops. That I saw an article that folks, criminals now, are potentially wearing rings, and that ring is basically a 3D printed finger. So you wear a ring and there's another finger coming off of your hand, so that when caught on surveillance footage, you have 6 fingers. Which now if that surveillance footage image, or that image capture from that surveillance footage, is submitted as part of evidence for court, they can say, there's 6 fingers. That image was clearly generated by AI. Because if you think about stuff like some of the AI art and image generation, they do a really bad job at certain body parts, like hands and sometimes arms. So that's like, now the argument is you wear a 6th or a 7th finger when you go commit your crime. So then the video or the photographic evidence is submitted in court. They can say there's too many fingers, that was clearly AI generated, even though it wasn't.
Oh, there's that whole manifesto collection that is hoodies, t-shirts, pants that you wear that breaks automated
facial recognition,
video recording, and facial recognition. Yep.
Or just hire somebody that happens to have darker skin, because most of the models aren't
trained on lighter skin models. Yep. And I haven't seen the hoodies. I remember seeing we covered that on the show way back, Tyler, about some of the stuff that you could basically, you know, have a printed picture with some abstract, and it would totally break all of the facial recognition. In fact, effectively turned you invisible to some of the camera stuff.
Yeah, it's Capable. It's a Milan company that they have a whole clothing line that
stealth hoodie.
Is it capable? How you'd see it taped or taped? Yeah, spelled.
So it's Capable, CAP_ABLE.
Yep, capable clothing.
Yep.
Interesting.
It's very interesting from that standpoint.
Barry will have a hoodie ordered before the end of the episode.
But there's a couple that have IR flare in there that, you know, obscure your face using a hat or a hoodie. Those ones are kind of well known. This one is for AI face generation. It's not going to stop a lot of them. It's going to mess with some of the algorithms. But if someone pulls the video is still going to be there with your face on it. So it's
capable.design
for certain things. I think it's got a use case, but it's not going to just take you off of video.
Interesting.
Sam had a ChatGPT related article.
He did.
Where did it go?
There was another interesting one, the Chrome browser extension that steals your cookies.
Yeah.
I mean, there are a lot of those, let's be real, but there's one, the getcookies.txt extension, which was widely used. All of the cookies that you could read and see, it also sent those to a developer that created it. And if you had a pie hole, you would see some very interesting traffic calling home from this extension. So anybody that was using getcookies.txt to extract cookies or leverage them for pen tests or any of those things, probably a good idea to notify your client and or not use that extension anymore, because it was sending that extra set of cookies via an HTTP header call.
I don't know how you say the word Waluigi effect. That was his article.
Interesting.
Why do large language models such as ChatGPT produce wrong answers?
The Waluigi effect?
Waluigi?
Maybe?
Waluigi.
People are yelling at us in Discord right now, aren't they?
Nope, no one is, because no one knows.
Yeah, no. Somebody's in their car yelling at us at a later date, right?
Yep.
Oh, all right. What else we got, Jeff? Is there anything else you wanted to hit? Unless I'd hit one of mine.
We could hit one of yours, and we could come back to my other philosophical article.
All right. For me, introducing the top 10 open source security risks. I thought this one was really interesting. Admittedly, they are some folks that do some analysis of software, maybe a competitor to my day job, slightly in some cases. But I thought they had some interesting stuff here. In a report by Synopsys, they were saying that 89% of code bases contain open source components that are more than 4 years out of date, and that 91% of code bases contain components that have no new development in over 2 years.
And they probably have Log4j too, as well.
40% still vulnerable, right?
Yep.
So, let's see. I'm going to... Well, one, just double check.
How does SBOM solve that problem? Or does it?
So SBOM doesn't solve the problem, but it gives you visibility into the problem, so that So thinking about CI/CD pipeline for an SBOM, if you're building SBOMs at specific times in your CI/CD pipeline, maybe not for every version, but versions that are getting ready to publish type of thing, or with some intervals, you can find that. So SBOM with vulnerability enhancements, and then ultimately VEX can give you here's what you're using, and here's potentially what is vulnerable to. Oh shit, before I send this thing to my customers, I need to address these problems. So it gives you some insight into some of that type of stuff through things that your developers might not realize that there's a problem, might not realize that through legacy code and or some of that other stuff is actually still in use. Any of the automated build processes that are feeding into some of that pipeline could really, in my opinion, could really help there. So
I can imagine though that you're a developer and you're relying on some code base, and SBOM illuminates that it has problems, but do you really have an alternative?
How do you mean?
I mean, is there an alternate code base that has updated bits of code that fix the problem that you can draw from instead of?
And that's a great question. So to that, the first thing on the open source top 10 open source risks, risk number 1, known vulnerabilities. So yes, it's something that is a component of your development cycle that is being used, libraries and so forth, that have some vulnerabilities that have already been identified. They've got a CVE assigned to them, and all of this type of stuff, and hopefully have a resolution. So arguably, yes, I can see that.
I'm looking at your top 10 table now.
Yep.
It's interesting because they have the category, which I assume means, I don't know what it means. Does it mean who's responsible for fixing it? Who's responsible for detecting
That's
it?
a great
or
question.
Who's using it? I'm not sure that's defined.
It's a great question.
But the choices are security or ops.
I want to say that they did not.
I don't see where it defines their terms.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. It doesn't define the terms, and that's kind of interesting.
Okay. Maybe the security is who's responsible for discovering this problem. Maybe.
Arguably. Yeah, the top two, compromise of legitimate package and name confusion attacks. We've talked about that a number of times.
Right.
With stuff like
ops wouldn't find that, security would.
Yep.
So I'm thinking it's detection.
Yep. Unmaintained software and outdated software. Okay. For both ops there. Number 6, untracked dependencies. SBOM.
Yep.
Yep. Let's see, license risk. This one's a bigger deal than I think many people realize in that, like, yeah, you want to use this open source project, but the license isn't compatible about how you want to use it in your product or potentially even redistribute it. Like, that's a
start
big
making
thing.
millions of dollars all of a sudden, and you used a library or something. You have recompense to pay.
But that's not a problem because nobody ever reads the EULA.
Surprisingly, folks are, corporate and government entities are starting to read those EULAs and realize that there are licenses that are potentially incompatible with the stuff that they're buying. And Yep.
Well, that's a good thing.
Yeah, the last two there, unapproved change, mutable, and under oversized dependency. Okay, the under oversized dependency, I can see like it says an NPM micro package or a package with a lot of functionality, only of which a fraction may be used.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can see that. And arguably tying that to something like SBOM, that's where Vex and Vex csaf come in. Vex is the vulnerability exchange.
But is it easy or hard to rip out only what you need and remove all the rest? But because it comes as a package.
Right. In some cases, yeah, you're as a developer, you're having to do a lot more work to only include the specific functions within those libraries that you want to use. Another one also with the Vex stuff is basically, hey, SBOM, you've got this particular library in use in your product, and it's vulnerable. Bad Larry, you're doing a bad thing. And then I can come back with a Vex and say, yeah, no, I am using it, but the functions specifically in the CVE that are being called, I'm not using. And you clearly look at the source code and we can say that, nope, those functions aren't being used. And that's where, Vex is I think about from this audit perspective of the auditor comes in and says, Larry, your password policy sucks. You're only using, you can only do up to 12 characters and they're only alpha characters. Mm-hmm. Bad password. But I can go back and say, yeah, I'm using that password, but we have 2-factor authentication turned on, and you have to come into our facility in front of a security guard and do it. We have other mitigating controls, or we're not using that functionality. To me, that's where Vex comes in.
Gotcha.
I got really educated on some of that stuff really fast. So, smarts.
And they got pictures of all the contributors. That's cool.
Yeah, I'm looking to see if I recognize anybody there.
Me too. They're all white guys. One person that appears to be female.
HashiCorp, Paylocity, Apollo.io, Discord.
Tyler, did you find a story yet you want to talk about?
I talked about the cookies.
It's all about the
That's
cookies.
all you got?
That's all I got.
It's all about the cookies. Well, we are reaching that hour, aren't we?
There's one more if we could squeeze it in.
Yeah, totally.
In the spirit of Paul. I wanted to touch on another 37 stories.
Maybe we'll add another 3 after that. All right. What's up, Jeff?
My story number 3, why data breaches are increasing and 6 ways companies can avoid them. Again, it kind of weaves together some of the other stories we've talked about. The cybersecurity strategy being one of them. But, why data breaches are increasing, this article says the why is simply the failure to consider privacy and data protection from the earliest product design stage. I'm not sure I completely agree with that, but as a starting point, I don't completely disagree with that.
And that's some of the things back to our AMA earlier about why is security hard.
Yes,
and that was my sort of take on why security is hard, because the internet at the product design stage didn't consider privacy and data protection, because that was not the intent.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But we all latched onto this backbone that made everything available to everybody all at once.
Yep.
Convenience.
Tyler?
The data breaches are happening right now because there is money and monetary value. Like, let's be real, this all ties back to money. We have a geopolitical atmosphere where a lot of people are out of jobs. There's wars going on. There's not a lot of opportunity for particular actors to do something, and people are paying a lot of money, so they're able to fund these ongoing attacks and continue a market that is booming. So why would that not happen more? There seems to be very little doubt in my mind that we're seeing all kinds of breaches because ransomware is getting paid, and those breaches are successful across a wide swath of people, and opportunity for those people to make money in other places at that level is not as abundant. So,
well, and I would go out on a limb and say that PCI has had the impact of making it less lucrative for the bad guys to make money off of stealing credit cards. It's harder for them to do now. In many
there's
cases.
less value there.
Yeah, I mean, and so malware has shown up and ransomware has shown up because it's easier, it's lucrative. Why not do that?
Yeah, I mean, when you're paying 50 cents at a premium for good credit cards right now, 50 cents a credit card, like, in order to get to even $1 million ransom, much less 244 million, that is a lot of credit cards, and you still have to monetize those and sell them. And the market's not very hot for that. So, again, this comes back to the privacy. We've done several podcasts and talked about this many times. If we could eliminate, as a country or as a state, I don't care how we do it, we have to come up with a way to eliminate the monetary value around an identity. Remove credit cards and make them public, social security numbers, make them public. If all of these things that we are protecting...
Oh, no.
Oh, no.
Oh, no.
We lost Tyler.
Oh, he was so good. Oh.
Hopefully he'll come back.
Dun, dun, dun. All the things just clicked off.
Well, we're still here.
Yep, we're still here, right?
I mean, the six...
Oh, he's back.
He's coming back.
Wow, here. I was on a full rant there.
You were. Pick up where you left off.
I don't even know where I left off. I mean, I was talking about if we could get to the point where the identities did not have monetary values as a society, we would eliminate a good portion of what we are paying for and trying to protect. Social Security was not designed to be an identity. Let's remove that as a value. Credit cards should not be an identity. Let's get to something that is immutable and has no numbers that can be stolen. Let's go to the contactless and leverage the technology and cryptography that we have at our hands. Like, these are solvable problems. It's just a large cog that we're trying to move from a government standpoint and a long-standing system that just everyone can't decide on something. If we remove those, attackers would stop selling them, and we would stop having to protect and worry about all of these things that we're spending billions of dollars on. I'm not understanding why this is such a huge problem.
Well, because I think part of it is because it comes at a cost, and most organizations, at least in the private sector, have still not embraced appropriately, and I don't think we've done a good job of being able to educate and explain, because we don't know either what is the actual cost of implementing a control, providing a more secure solution, or the vendors and companies that build the things. There's not a sufficient economic argument yet. This is a recurring theme in talks that I've given in the past, and of course everything's pre-COVID, most of my talk. But the idea that when I learned about the risk equation, And I like to simplify things, but when I learned about the risk equation when I was working for the government, the risk was loss of human life in one way, shape, or another. Whereas out in the private sector, and what I like to call the real world, the risk is really a dollar figure. And I submit it boils down to two things. One is your ability to make money, and how much does it cost to run your business securely, whatever that is. And then, of course, everything you do to try to manage that risk has a cost itself. And trying to, how do you figure out how to spend your scant resources in the right places, the right amount, to get the biggest impact on your overall risk? And oh, by the way, it's not 100%, and you could still get popped and breached anyway, which is why so many organizations get really mad at things like PCI. Well, we were supposed to be secure because we were compliant, and we still got breached. PCI never guarantee that you won't be breached.
Right.
None of the compliance or regulatory standards would suggest that.
They only help you be more resilient to it.
They help you be more resilient. They help you really, at the end of the day, PCI is designed to help you mitigate the known and hopefully prepare for the unknown, at least in terms of having forensic data so you can figure out what happened so it doesn't happen again. But it's never presumed that you will never be breached. But few people like to talk about that.
Yeah.
We're at that point though where we got to be getting close to those numbers making sense. It's last year is the first, maybe 2 years ago was the first year that cyber liability insurance lost money.
Right.
And so that's why they have this big shift in what they're covering and having to be more secure, and not just doing questionnaires, all of the things that are making them shift because they've lost money. So the cost of, PHI being exposed, you can be for, 3 million records, you could be over $300 million in fees. So again, starting to think outside the box and what it costs to actually shift the system where people hold their own encrypted PHI information that you bring with you to the doctor's office, and the healthcare industry doesn't hold your records anymore. Like, why are we not trying to think outside the box and not do this the same way for every single vertical? I mean, it's not just healthcare, it's credit card numbers, it's, ad tracking data, all the things that people are monetizing for like research and telemetry is also the same thing that's costing them millions or billions of dollars to protect and or getting fined for once there is a breach.
Because it costs money to make that shift.
It does. But I think it would, if someone would just put some figures behind it and actually do this to make a shift. I mean, we have some historical data. You look at, what is it, Estonia, that went to a voting system. Like, how much money is being spent on voting research and ensuring votes are secure, and all the lobbying to have different voting machines for different areas. Like, we have an identity for voting. Estonia's got digital, backed identities that are similar to like a PGP, where they have identities. They've got credit card numbers, finances are tied to it, records are tied to it. Like, why are we not doing some of these more modern things that are technologically secure in our country? And I think it's because no one wants to be that forefront runner that gets criticized as soon as, someone doesn't agree with it.
Agreed.
Concur.
Hey, so in honor of Paul, one last story.
Okay. And then I'll throw in one too.
Well, and it's going to be a story for my list. So
Sure.
in honor of Paul, because that's how he rolls, right?
In pure Paul style.
And I'll tie. So my story number 9, I'll tie this to my story number 1. In my opinion, is pretty fascinating. So the Wired article that is here came linked from another article that I can't remember where I got it from, and it had all of the papers from Mordecai Guri at Ben Gurion Institute of Ben Gurion in Israel University. His team effectively is, as they say, inventing one devious hack after another that takes advantage of accidental and little noticed emissions of computers' components to bridge air gaps. Noise from internal fan changing air temperatures and patterns the receiving computer can detect with a thermal sensor, blinking a stream of information from a computer hard drive LED. And their most recent one is, quote, Magneto and an Android app pair called Odini, which is a magnetic Houdini. They are effectively manipulating the computer's processor cores to create certain electrical frequencies of electrical signals, which can generate a pattern of magnetic forces enough to manipulate the Android compass in a phone to transmit data by manipulating the compass to change direction of the magnetical system.
So somewhere in the middle of the article, they do give homage to NSA's decades-old implementation of whatever technique they were talking about.
Yep.
Electromagnetic covert channels. So good. I feel comfortable in saying
Yep.
this is not new conceptually.
Yep. Kind of a modern update on NSA's Tempest technique.
In the old days, it was all about sound waves of various frequencies. It makes me wonder if, everything is not ones and zeros. Everything is still a sound wave. It's still a wave.
Yep.
Which can be expressed with a one and zero. I understand, but I don't know.
Yep. The magnetic one.
You guys' research is amazing, honestly. Like, I don't like a lot of the academia that comes out of some of like these theoretical things, but these guys show proof of concept and rightfully so. Like, the Israelis have a very real threat profile, and they do really good work because they have to. And I like seeing this because they actually make POCs that are viable and or within reason of use and cost capability.
Yeah, totally.
So,
and they even mentioned Tempest.
Yep. And Tyler, to that, reasonable cost, actionable, demonstratable, and I'd argue usable. So from their new Magneto attack or exfiltration method, they can exfiltrate stolen data at between 1 and 40 bits a second.
Jeez, that's bad.
Like, no, that's not bad. Like, at the slowest rate, fast enough to steal a password in a minute or a 4096-bit encryption key in a little over an hour. I mean,
it's something to build on.
In reality, that's not bad.
Yep.
That's not bad. Especially given that all you need is a CPU with a processor and an Android phone with a compass. Like,
but again, why is security hard? This is somebody that's actually targeting you.
Yeah.
This isn't random bots that get thrown out on the internet and get picked up, or random phishing attacks and let's see who bites.
Yep.
Targets of opportunity, as it were. This is actually somebody going after you, and what lengths will they go to get your data? And we are woefully unprepared outside of government and DOD
this is
to go after
state.
this.
Yeah.
This is nation.
This is nation.
No, this is university, Tyler. Come on now. It says right he works for the university.
Yeah, of course he does.
Well, it's job security, I guess.
Yeah.
There's a couple other good stories. We don't have to go into them, but like some to check
do
out.
one more, Tyler. Pick one out.
Or just hit those highlights, Tyler.
Yeah, the highlights were the Android Shein app. Like, that was a very good write-up on the Android mobile app for Shein, which is a very popular clothing company you buy from China, and they ship you a bunch of stuff. It had a very interesting clipboard access that sent data out to URL and exfiltrated clipboard stuff. And it was most likely unintentional and was used for ad tracking stuff. But
which story was this and of whose?
That's a good question.
Just making sure it's
I
in
don't
there.
remember whose story it was.
13 of Sam's.
13 of Sam's. There you go.
Yep.
So another good write-up on just how they use like Frida and looked at the app and found the clipboard and the functions that did it. There are many applications that have. We talk about TikTok in one of the other stories, and some of the data and security or privacy issues around apps that are on people's phones. So some good things just to be aware of and or look at from the side of privacy and what's getting leaked.
Interesting stuff. All right, with that, let's call it a night. Jeff, take us out of here.
Over and out.